They broke an 8-year-old girl's leg on her own front porch, and they had no idea they had just declared war on the most dangerous mafia boss in the entire city. The crack of bone echoed through the quiet suburban street, sharp and sickening, followed by the kind of scream only a child can make. Raw, unfiltered, tearing through the afternoon like glass shattering. 8-year-old Kayla Park lay crumpled on the concrete, her tiny leg bent at an angle no leg should ever bend, white bone pressing against skin that was never meant to stretch that way. The men who did this, gang members with viper tattoos crawling up their necks, walked away slowly, laughing, making sure every neighbor hiding behind their curtains understood the message. But what no one on that street knew yet, not the neighbors, not the vipers, not even Kayla's sobbing mother, was that someone had just witnessed everything. And by sundown, every single one of them would learn exactly what happens when you harm a child in Julian Hahn's territory. If you believe in justice for kids, hit like so more people see this story. Maylin Park burst through the screen door and collapsed beside her daughter, hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. The vipers weren't there by accident. They were delivering a message. Punishment for Maylin refusing to steal medication from the hospital where she worked. And now her little girl was paying the price. The ambulance arrived quickly, but to Kayla, minutes felt like hours. She whimpered softly, exhausted from shock, her small fingers gripping her mother's sleeve. Maylin tried to breathe, but guilt crushed her chest. I should have just given them what they wanted. This is my fault. As the ambulance pulled away, sirens wailing, Maylin didn't notice the 4 black motorcycles idling at the end of the street. She didn't see the men in leather watching the flashing lights disappear. But someone else had heard that scream. Someone the vipers should never have provoked. Julian Hahn sat motionless on his motorcycle, black leather jacket, designer sunglasses hiding eyes that had seen too much death. His men waited for orders. He gave none. But something in that mother's scream hit him in a place he thought had turned to stone 30 years ago. He had knelt over someone like this once. A little girl, his sister, 9 years old, bleeding out on a sidewalk while neighbors watched from behind their curtains and did nothing. Julian removed his sunglasses and watched the ambulance vanish. Then his jaw tightened. Make sure you're subscribed and comment where you're watching from. The next morning, Maylin opened her front door and froze. The rumble of engines had returned. 4 black motorcycles lined the curb, the same riders from yesterday. She pulled Kayla behind her, heart slamming against her ribs. What do they want? What did I do? But Julian Hahn didn't come to intimidate. He stepped off his motorcycle slowly, walked up the driveway, and stopped at the porch steps. His men stayed back. He looked at Kayla, really looked at her. The heavy white cast on her small leg, the fear in her eyes, the way she still tried to sit up straight even though everything in her wanted to hide. He reached into his jacket. Maylin stopped breathing. But what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was an envelope, thick, heavy, stuffed with more cash than Maylin had ever seen. He set it on the railing. Then he placed something else beside it. A small stuffed panda bear with a pink ribbon. I saw what happened, Julian said quietly. What they did to your daughter, that should never happen to anyone. Maylin's voice came out as a whisper. Why would you help us? Julian's jaw tightened. He looked at Kayla one more time. Because someone should have done this for my sister. He walked back to his motorcycle without another word. His men fell in behind him. The engines roared, and they disappeared down the street. The news spread like wildfire. Julian Hahn came to the Park house, the Mafia boss, the one even the police are afraid of. Some whispered he was planning to burn the vipers to the ground. Others said Maylin had made a deal with the devil, but the truth was far more surprising. And by the time the sun set on that neighborhood, the entire town would understand exactly what happens when you harm a child in Julian Hahn's city. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday afternoon. Kayla Park sat on the front porch with her coloring book, filling in the wings of a butterfly with every shade of purple she owned. The sun was warm. The street was quiet. Her mother was inside finishing a double shift's worth of paperwork before dinner. She didn't hear them coming until the shadows fell across her page. 3 men stood at the bottom of the porch steps. 2 of them were big, arms covered in tattoos, faces she didn't recognize. But the one in the middle, the one with the cold eyes and the viper inked across his throat, he was the one who smiled at her. And something about that smile made Kayla's stomach twist. "Hey, little girl." His voice was soft, almost friendly. "Your mommy home?" Kayla didn't answer. She clutched her purple crayon tighter. The man tilted his head. "I asked you a question." "She's busy," Kayla whispered. The 2 men behind him laughed. The one with the viper tattoo, Damon Vega, though Kayla didn't know his name yet, climbed the first step, then the second. He crouched down until he was eye level with her, close enough that she could smell cigarettes and something sour on his breath. "Go get her," he said. "Tell her Damon's here. Tell her she has one more chance to do what we asked. And if she says no again..." He glanced at her coloring book. "Well, let's just say pretty little butterflies get their wings ripped off." Kayla's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run inside and lock the door. But something, maybe fear, maybe something braver than fear, kept her frozen in place. She looked Damon Vega directly in the eyes. "My mom said you're bad people," Kayla said, her voice trembling but clear. "She said we don't help bad people, so you should leave." The smile vanished from Damon's face. For a moment, nobody moved. The 2 men behind him exchanged glances. A neighbor across the street paused while watering her garden, watching from behind her fence. Then Damon laughed. A low, ugly sound. "Bad people," he repeated. He stood up slowly, towering over her. "You know what bad people do, little girl?" He moved so fast Kayla didn't even have time to scream. His hand shot out and grabbed her ankle, yanked her off the porch step like she weighed nothing. She hit the concrete hard, the coloring book flying, crayons scattering everywhere. Before she could understand what was happening, Damon's boot was on her chest, pinning her down, and his hands were around her leg. "They teach lessons!" He twisted. The snap was so loud it echoed off the houses. Kayla's scream ripped through the neighborhood, high, piercing, filled with a kind of pain no child should ever know. Her leg bent sideways at the shin, bone pressing white against the skin, and then the blood came, soaking through her sock, pooling on the concrete beneath her. Damon released her and stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans like he'd touched something dirty. "Tell your mother," he said calmly. That was her final warning. The 3 of them walked away. Slow, unhurried. Laughing. The screen door exploded open. Mei Lin flew down the steps, her face white with horror, and dropped to her knees beside her daughter. Kayla was shaking violently, her small body convulsing with shock, her eyes wide and unseeing. "Someone help me!" Mei Lin screamed. "Please! Someone call 911!" Across the street, Mrs. Henderson turned off her hose and went inside. 2 houses down, Mr. Pruitt closed his blinds. A teenager on his bike pedaled faster, disappearing around the corner. Not a single door opened. Not one person stepped outside, because everyone on that street knew the Vipers, and everyone knew what happened to people who got involved. Mei Lin clutched her broken daughter and dialed 911 herself, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. And 3 blocks away, 4 black motorcycles rolled to a stop at a red light. Julian Hahn removed his sunglasses. He had heard the scream. The light turned green, but Julian Hahn didn't move. His 3 men idled behind him, engines rumbling low, waiting. They knew better than to speak when Julian got that look on his face. The stillness, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Something had caught his attention. And when Julian Hahn paid attention to something, people usually ended up regretting it. "Boss?" Marco, his second-in-command, pulled up beside him. Everything good?" Julian didn't answer. He was listening. The scream had faded now, replaced by something worse, the raw, broken sobbing of a mother. It was coming from the next street over, a quiet suburban block. Nice lawns, minivans and driveways, the kind of neighborhood where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Julian pulled off the main road without a word. His men followed. They rolled down the tree-lined street slowly, engines growling, chrome catching the afternoon sun. Curtains moved in windows. A man walking his dog crossed to the other side of the road. A mother pulled her children inside and locked the door. Julian was used to that. Fear followed him everywhere. He had built his empire on it. But today, he wasn't thinking about his empire. He was thinking about that scream. They reached the end of the block and stopped. 4 black motorcycles in a perfect line, idling like predators deciding whether to strike. And then Julian saw her. A woman on her knees in the middle of a front yard, clutching a little girl who couldn't have been older than 8. The child was shaking, her face gray with shock, her leg twisted at an angle that made Julian's stomach tighten. Blood had soaked through her white sock and pooled on the concrete beneath her. Crayons were scattered everywhere, purple, pink, yellow, bright colors against the red. The mother was screaming into her phone, begging for an ambulance, begging for someone, anyone, to help. But the street was silent. Julian counted 6 houses with people visible in the windows, watching, doing nothing. He had seen this before, 40 years ago. A different street, a different city, a little girl named Lily with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile who loved to draw butterflies. His sister, 9 years old, bleeding out on the sidewalk after a stray bullet from a gang fight tore through her chest. Julian had screamed for help that day too. And just like today, not a single door had opened. He remembered kneeling beside her, her small hand going limp in his, her eyes fading while neighbors watched from behind their curtains. He remembered the ambulance arriving too late. He remembered the funeral, the silence, the rage that had hollowed him out and never quite left. Julian had sworn that day that he would never be powerless again. He had kept that promise. He had become the most feared man in the city. He had built an empire of shadows and violence and absolute control. No one touched what was his. No one crossed him and lived to tell about it. But standing there, watching this mother cradle her broken daughter while the whole neighborhood pretended not to see, he realized he was still that 9-year-old boy, still kneeling on the sidewalk, still screaming for help that would never come. The ambulance arrived. Paramedics rushed out, loaded the girl onto a stretcher. The mother climbed in beside her, never letting go of her daughter's hand. The sirens wailed, and the ambulance disappeared around the corner. Julian's men watched him, waiting for orders. He gave none. "Let's go," he finally said. They turned their motorcycles around. Engines roared. One by one they pulled away from the curb. But at the end of the street, Julian stopped. He looked back. The crayons were still scattered on the porch. Purple, pink, yellow. A coloring book lay open on the concrete, the page half finished, a butterfly with one wing colored in. Julian stared at it for a long moment. Then he put his sunglasses back on and rode away. But something had changed behind those dark lenses. Something had cracked open. And the men who had broken that little girl's leg, the ones who thought they could hurt a child and walk away laughing, they had no idea what was coming for them. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and despair. Mei Lin sat in a plastic chair beside her daughter's bed, still wearing the clothes she'd been in when the ambulance arrived. Blood on her knees, grass stains on her palms, mascara streaked down her face. She hadn't let go of Kayla's hand since they wheeled her out of surgery 3 hours ago. The doctor had delivered the news with practiced detachment. 2 fractures. One at the tibia, one at the fibula. The bone had nearly broken through the skin. They'd inserted 2 metal pins to hold everything in place. 6 months minimum before she could walk normally again. Physical therapy, follow-up surgeries. A long, painful road ahead. And then came the part that shattered Mei Lin completely. "Mrs. Park, I need to discuss the financial aspect of Kayla's care." Mei Lin had insurance through the hospital where she worked as a nurse, but it was the cheapest plan available. High deductible, limited coverage. The surgery alone would cost more than she made in 6 months. The pins, the anesthesia, the hospital stay, the physical therapy, the numbers blurred together into a figure so large it made her dizzy. "We have payment plans available," the administrator said, sliding a folder across the desk. "And there are hardship programs you can apply for. But I have to be transparent with you. Given the extent of the procedures required, you're looking at significant out-of-pocket expenses." Significant. Such a clean word for your life is about to fall apart. Mei Lin signed the papers without really reading them. What choice did she have? Her daughter was lying in a hospital bed with metal pins in her leg. She would sell everything she owned. She would work 3 jobs. She would figure it out. She always figured it out. That's what single mothers did. She walked back to Kayla's room and found her daughter awake, staring at the ceiling. The cast on her leg was enormous. Bright white plaster running from her toes to her thigh, elevated on a stack of pillows. Her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes, an IV dripping steadily into her tiny arm. But when she saw her mother, Kayla smiled. "Hi, Mommy." Mei Lin's heart cracked right down the middle. She sat on the edge of the bed, brushing the hair from Kayla's forehead, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hi, baby. How are you feeling?" "Okay." Kayla's voice was small, hoarse from the anesthesia. "The doctor said I was very brave." "You were." Mei Lin's throat tightened. "You were so brave." Kayla was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up at her mother with those big brown eyes that had seen too much, understood too much, carried too much for an 8-year-old. "Mommy, are you crying?" Mei Lin wiped her face quickly. "No, baby, I'm fine." "You're lying." Kayla reached up and touched her mother's cheek. Her fingers were cold from the IV. "It's okay, Mommy. It doesn't hurt that much. Really." But even as she said it, tears slipped down her own cheeks. Silent tears. The kind children cry when they're trying to be strong for the people they love. Mei Lin pulled her daughter close, carefully, so carefully, and held her. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into Kayla's hair. "I'm so sorry, baby. This is my fault. I should have protected you. I should have—" "It's not your fault." Kayla's small arms wrapped around her mother's neck. "Those men were bad. You told me we don't help bad people. You were right." Mei Lin squeezed her eyes shut, but the tears came anyway. She had never felt so alone. No husband. He'd left before Kayla turned 2. No family nearby. Her parents were gone. Her sister lived 3 states away. No friends who could help. Not with something like this. Just her and Kayla against the world. And right now, the world was winning. Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting. Orange and pink and purple. The colors Kayla loved to use in her coloring books. The colors that were now scattered across a blood-stained porch. Mei Lin held her daughter and wondered how they were going to survive this. She didn't know that help was already on its way. The ride home from the hospital was silent. Mei Lin drove slowly, both hands gripping the wheel, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. Kayla sat in the back seat, her casted leg propped up on a pillow, staring out the window at nothing. The doctors had given her pain medication that made her drowsy, but she refused to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Damon Vega's face, that smile, those hands reaching for her. So she kept her eyes open. When they pulled into the driveway, Mei Lin sat in the car for a long moment before moving. The porch was still stained. She could see it from here. The dark patches on the concrete where her daughter's blood had pooled. The crayons were gone. A neighbor must have swept them up. But the coloring book was still there, pages fluttering in the breeze. Nobody had come to check on them. Not a single phone call. Not one casserole or card or offer to help. Of course not. The Vipers had made their point, and everyone on this street had received the message loud and clear. The Park family was untouchable. Not because they were protected, but because helping them meant becoming a target, too. Mei Lin carried Kayla inside, settled her on the couch with her leg elevated, and made her a bowl of soup she wouldn't eat. Then she went back outside to get the mail. Bills, more bills, a credit card offer, and at the bottom of the stack, a single sheet of paper folded in thirds. No envelope, no stamp, just a note, handwritten in blocky letters. You had your warning. Next time, it won't be her leg. Mei Lin's hands trembled so violently the paper slipped from her fingers. She didn't pick it up. She couldn't. Instead, she walked back to the porch and sat down on the top step, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her. Kayla was inside, safe for now. But for how long? The Vipers would come back. They always came back. And next time, she couldn't finish the thought. The sun was warm on her face, but Mei Lin felt cold, hollow, like something vital had been carved out of her, and she was just going through the motions now, a ghost pretending to be alive. She didn't know how long she sat there, minutes, maybe an hour. And then she heard it. A low rumble in the distance, growing louder, deeper. The unmistakable growl of motorcycle engines, not one, but several, approaching from the main road. Mei Lin's head snapped up. 4 black motorcycles turned onto her street. Matching bikes. Chrome gleaming in the morning sun. Men in leather, faces hard, moving in perfect formation like they'd done this 1,000 times. And at the front, the one leading them all, was a man she didn't recognize, but somehow knew was in charge. Black leather jacket, designer sunglasses, dark hair slicked back. He rode like someone who had never been afraid of anything in his life. The motorcycles slowed and stopped. Right in front of her house. Mei Lin's blood turned to ice. She scrambled to her feet, heart slamming against her ribs, and ran inside. Kayla was still on the couch, eyes half closed from the medication. Mommy, what's wrong? Mei Lin pulled her daughter into her arms, carefully, always carefully now, and pressed her back against the wall, away from the windows. Nothing, baby. Nothing's wrong. But her voice was shaking. Her whole body was shaking. Through the gap in the curtains, she watched the lead rider step off his motorcycle. He removed his sunglasses slowly, folded them, and tucked them into his jacket pocket. Then he started walking up her driveway. Mei Lin's mind raced. Who are they? What do they want? Are they with the Vipers? Are they worse? She had heard rumors about men like this, men who ran the city from the shadows, men whose names were whispered but never spoken aloud, men you didn't cross, ever. And now one of them was standing on her front porch. She held Kayla tighter and waited. The knock was soft, almost gentle. Mei Lin didn't move. She stood frozen against the wall, Kayla pressed against her chest, watching the shadow shift behind the frosted glass of the front door. Another knock. Patient. Unhurried. Mrs. Park. The voice was calm, controlled. I'm not here to hurt you, I just want to talk. Kayla looked up at her mother. Mommy? Who is it? Mei Lin didn't answer. Her mind was screaming at her to stay hidden, to call the police, to do something. But what good would that do? The police hadn't helped when the Vipers broke her daughter's leg. They had taken a report, nodded sympathetically, and done absolutely nothing. If this man wanted to hurt them, a locked door wouldn't stop him. Slowly, against every instinct in her body, Mei-Lin walked to the door. She turned the deadbolt, and she opened it. Julian Hahn stood on her porch. Up close, he was even more intimidating than she'd expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of stillness that came from absolute confidence. His face was unreadable. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, a thin scar near his left temple that caught the light. Everything about him radiated power. And yet, he didn't step forward, didn't try to push his way inside. He simply stood there, hands visible at his sides, waiting. "May I come in?" he asked. Mei-Lin shook her head. "Say what you came to say." Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. He nodded once. "Fair enough." He looked past her, into the living room where Kayla sat on the couch, her casted leg propped on pillows, watching him with wide, curious eyes. Julian's expression shifted, just slightly, when he saw her. Something softer. Something almost human. "May I speak to her?" "No." Mei-Lin's voice was sharp. "Whatever you want, you deal with me." Julian studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to one knee. Not on the porch, on the top step, below her, looking up. This powerful, feared man, kneeling. "I saw what happened yesterday," he said quietly. "I was passing through when I heard her scream. I saw those men walk away laughing, and I saw every single neighbor on this street close their curtains and pretend they didn't see anything." Mei-Lin's throat tightened. "What happened to your daughter should never happen to anyone." Julian's voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something raw. "She's a brave little girl, standing up to men like that. Most adults wouldn't have done what she did." Behind her, Kayla had gone very still, listening. Julian reached into his jacket. Mei-Lin flinched. But what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was an envelope, thick, heavy. He held it out to her. This should cover her medical expenses. Surgery, physical therapy, whatever she needs. Mei-Lin stared at the envelope like it was a coiled snake. "I don't understand." "There's nothing to understand." "There's always something." Her voice cracked. "Nobody gives something for nothing. What do you want? What's this going to cost me?" Julian's jaw tightened. He was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting somewhere far away. Somewhere she couldn't follow. 40 years ago, he said slowly, I had a little sister. Her name was Lily. She was 9 years old. One afternoon she was playing outside our apartment when a stray bullet caught her in the chest. Gang violence. Wrong place, wrong time. Mei-Lin's breath caught. I knelt beside her on that sidewalk, screaming for help. Julian's voice was barely above a whisper now. Not a single person came. Not one. She died in my arms while the whole neighborhood watched from their windows. He looked up at Mei-Lin, and for the first time, she saw something behind those cold eyes. Something broken. Someone should have helped us that day. Someone should have done something. He pressed the envelope into her hands. No one did. So I'm doing it now. He stood, straightened his jacket, put his sunglasses back on. I'm not asking for anything, Mrs. Park. Take care of your daughter. He turned and walked back to his motorcycle. His men fell in behind him. The engines roared to life and they pulled away, disappearing around the corner without looking back. Mei-Lin stood on the porch, trembling, holding an envelope full of more money than she'd ever seen. And for the first time in 2 days, she felt something other than fear. She didn't have a word for it yet. It started with small things. The first morning after Julian's visit, Mei-Lin noticed a black motorcycle parked at the end of the block. Just sitting there. Engine off. A man in leather leaning against it, arms crossed, watching the street. She told herself it was a coincidence. By the third morning, she stopped pretending. The motorcycle was always there. Sometimes it was one man, sometimes another, but someone was always watching. They never approached, never knocked on her door, never so much as waved. They just stood guard, like sentinels. The threatening notes stopped. Maylin hadn't told anyone about the note she'd found in her mailbox, the one warning her that next time it wouldn't be Kayla's leg. She had been checking the mail with shaking hands every day since, dreading what she might find. But now there was nothing. No notes, no warnings, no dead animals or slashed tires, or any of the other horrors she had braced herself for. Just silence. The Viper graffiti disappeared too. There had been a spray-painted snake on the fence at the end of her street for months. A territorial marker, a reminder of who controlled this neighborhood. Everyone knew what it meant. Everyone walked past it with their eyes down. One morning, Maylin drove past and it was gone. Painted over with fresh white primer. Clean, like it had never existed. She started noticing other things. The broken latch on her back gate, the one she'd been meaning to fix for 6 months, was suddenly repaired. New screws? New hinges? She hadn't heard anyone in the yard. The crack in her front window, from when a viper had thrown a rock at it last winter, had been replaced with fresh glass. Her lawn, which she hadn't had time to mow since Kayla's injury, was trimmed and edged. Nobody asked for credit. Nobody left a note. It just happened. Then came the grocery store. Maylin was struggling through the parking lot, trying to push a cart with one hand while balancing Kayla's crutches with the other. Kayla was still in the car, waiting, her leg too bulky for the cramped aisles. Maylin's back ached, her eyes burned from lack of sleep. She was running on caffeine and terror and sheer maternal stubbornness. "Mrs. Park!" She spun around, heart lurching. A man stood behind her, big, tattooed, leather jacket, one of Julian's men. She recognized him from the motorcade. Maylin's grip tightened on the cart. But the man just smiled. A small, almost shy smile that looked completely wrong on his scarred face. "Let me get those for you." Before she could protest, he took the cart from her hands and started loading the bags into her trunk. Carefully. Gently. Like he was handling something precious. Maylin's voice faltered. "You don't have to." "It's no trouble." He finished loading, closed the trunk, and returned the cart to the corral. Then he walked back to her, gave a small nod, and said, "You take care, ma'am." He was gone before she could respond. Ma'am. This giant, terrifying man had called her ma'am. That night, after Kayla was asleep, Maylin sat on the porch and watched the motorcycle at the end of the street. The rider was different tonight, younger, leaner, but the posture was the same. Alert, watchful, ready. She thought about the envelope of cash hidden in her closet. She thought about the repaired fence and the mowed lawn and the man who had carried her groceries like it was nothing. She thought about Julian Hahn kneeling on her porch, telling her about a little girl named Lily who died in his arms 40 years ago. And slowly, something clicked into place. Julian hadn't just given her money. He had given her protection. The Vipers wouldn't come back, they couldn't, because Julian Hahn, the most feared man in the city, had drawn a line around her family, an invisible barrier that said, "Touch them, and you answer to me." Maylin didn't know whether to feel grateful or terrified. Maybe both. Maybe that was okay. Julian came back on a Sunday. Maylin was in the kitchen when she heard the engine, just one this time, not 4. She looked out the window and saw him pulling into the driveway alone. No motorcade, no bodyguards. Just Julian Hahn, stepping off his bike and walking toward the porch like he belonged there. She opened the door before he could knock. "Mr. Hahn?" "Mrs. Park." He removed his sunglasses. "I wanted to check on her, if that's all right." Maylin hesitated. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was dangerous, inviting a mafia boss into her home, letting him near her daughter. But something had shifted in the past week. The fear was still there, but it had made room for something else. Trust, or something close to it. She stepped aside. She's in the living room. Kayla was on the couch, her casted leg propped on pillows, coloring in a new book. When she saw Julian, she didn't flinch, didn't hide behind her mother. She just looked up at him with those big, curious eyes and said, "Hi, you're the motorcycle man." Julian's expression softened. Just barely. "That's right. Your motorcycle is really cool." Kayla tilted her head. "Why do you ride it?" Julian glanced at Mei Lin, who gave a small nod. He walked over and lowered himself into the armchair across from Kayla, his large frame looking almost comical against the floral cushions. "It makes me feel free," he said. "Free from what?" Julian was quiet for a moment. "From everything, I suppose. When you're riding, it's just you and the road. No problems, no past, just the wind and the engine and wherever you're going next." Kayla considered this. "That sounds nice. I wish I could ride one." "Maybe someday, when you're older and your leg is healed?" She smiled at that. Then her face grew serious, the way children's faces do when they're about to ask something important. "Are you a bad man?" The question hung in the air. Mei Lin held her breath. Julian didn't look away from Kayla. He didn't flinch or deflect or offer some comfortable lie. He sat with the question like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I've done bad things," he finally said. His voice was low, honest. "Things I'm not proud of. Things I can't take back." Kayla waited. "But I'm trying to do something good now." He leaned forward slightly. "Does that make sense?" Kayla thought about it. Really thought, the way only children can, without pretense or judgment. "My mom says people can change if they really want to," she said. "Do you really want to?" Something flickered in Julian's eyes. Something vulnerable. "I think I do." Kayla nodded, satisfied. "Okay, then you're not a bad man. You're just a man who did bad things. There's a difference." Julian stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something Mei Lin had never expected to see. He smiled. Later, after Kayla had fallen asleep on the couch, Julian and Mei Lin sat on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, Julian broke the silence. "She reminds me of Lily." Mei Lin looked at him. "Your sister?" He nodded. "She was 9 when she died. Drive-by shooting. We were walking home from the corner store and a car came by and—" He stopped, swallowed. "She was gone before the ambulance arrived. I'm so sorry. The police came. They took statements, and then nothing." His jaw tightened. No arrests, no justice, just a funeral and a 9-year-old boy standing over his sister's grave, swearing he would never be powerless again. Mei Lin watched his profile in the fading light. "So you became powerful." "I became powerful," Julian agreed. "I built an empire. I made sure no one could ever hurt me or the people I cared about again." He paused. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot why I started. I forgot it was about protecting the innocent. I just became another predator." "And now?" Julian looked at the window where Kayla slept. "Now I remember." Julian Hahn had built his empire on violence. He knew how to make people disappear. He knew how to send messages written in blood. He knew 100 different ways to destroy a man. Slowly, painfully, completely. And every single one of them crossed his mind when he thought about Damon Vega. He could have done it the old way. A dark alley, a unmarked van, a body that would never be found. The vipers would have scattered like roaches, and everyone in the city would have understood the cost of crossing Julian Hahn. But that's not what he did. Instead, he made a phone call. Julian's network was vast. Decades of operating in the shadows had given him access to information most people didn't know existed. Bank accounts, shell companies, shipping manifests, security footage from cameras that weren't supposed to exist. Within 48 hours, his people had assembled a file on the Vipers that would make a federal prosecutor weep with joy. Drug shipments traced back to 3 major suppliers, assault footage from a dozen different incidents, including a crystal-clear recording of Damon Vega breaking an 8-year-old girl's leg on her own front porch, financial records showing money laundering through a chain of laundromats and auto shops. Names, dates, locations, everything. Julian didn't deliver it himself. That would have been too obvious. Instead, the file appeared anonymously on the desk of an FBI agent who had been trying to build a case against the Vipers for 2 years. No return address, no fingerprints, just a plain manila envelope stuffed with enough evidence to bring down an entire criminal organization. The dominoes started falling within 24 hours. Mei-Lin was giving Kayla her evening medication when the breaking news alert flashed across the television screen. Federal agents have conducted a major raid against the street gang known as the Vipers. Multiple arrests have been made, including the organization's alleged leader, Damon Vega, who is facing charges including drug trafficking, assault, and racketeering. Mei-Lin's hand froze mid-air, the pill bottle trembling in her grip. On the screen, she watched Damon Vega being led out of a rundown house in handcuffs. His face was twisted with rage, shouting obscenities at the cameras, struggling against the agents holding him. But what struck her most was his eyes. They were terrified. Authorities say the arrests were made possible by an anonymous tip that included extensive documentation of the gang's criminal activities. The investigation is ongoing, and more arrests are expected. Kayla looked up from her coloring book. "Mommy, isn't that the bad man?" Mei-Lin couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face, watching the man who had broken her daughter's leg being shoved into the back of a federal vehicle. Across town, Julian watched the same broadcast from his office. The room was dark, except for the glow of the television. He sat in his leather chair, perfectly still, a glass of whiskey untouched on the desk beside him. Marco stood in the doorway, watching his boss watch the news. Vega is expected to face federal charges that could result in decades of prison time. The segment ended. Julian picked up the remote and clicked off the television. The room fell silent. "It's done," Marco said. 72 hours. No shots fired, no bodies. The whole organization collapsed like a house of cards. Julian didn't respond. "You satisfied, boss?" Julian reached for his whiskey, took a slow sip, let the burn spread through his chest. "Satisfaction," he said quietly, "would have been putting a bullet in his head, making him beg, making him feel what that little girl felt." Marco waited. "This," Julian set down the glass. "This was the right thing." He stared at the blank television screen, seeing something far away, something 40 years gone. "I forgot there was a difference," he murmured, "between satisfaction and justice, between revenge and doing what's right." Marco didn't know what to say. In 30 years of working for Julian Hahn, he had never heard the man talk like this. Julian stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Maybe it's not too late to remember. 3 months later, the sun was shining. The neighborhood had never seen anything like it. A brand new playground stood where an empty lot used to be. Bright red slides, blue swings, a climbing wall shaped like a castle, and soft rubber ground that cushioned every fall. There were benches for parents, shade trees that had been planted just weeks ago, and a bronze plaque near the entrance that read, "For the children of this community. May they always have a safe place to play." No name on the plaque, no donor listed, just the words. But everyone knew who had paid for it. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew the whole neighborhood. People who had hidden behind their curtains 3 months ago now stood in the sunshine, smiling, taking pictures. The mayor gave a short speech about community and resilience. A local pastor offered a blessing. Children bounced impatiently, waiting for the moment they could finally run through the gates. But all eyes were on one little girl. Kayla Park stood at the entrance, holding her mother's hand. Her cast was gone, finally, mercifully gone, replaced by a small brace she would wear for a few more weeks. The doctor said she had healed remarkably well. They called it a miracle. Maylin called it something else. "You ready, baby?" she whispered. Kayla nodded. Her eyes were bright, determined, the same eyes that had stared down Damon Vega on that terrible afternoon. The same courage, the same fire. The ribbon was cut. The crowd cheered. And Kayla Park took her first real steps in 3 months. They were slow at first, tentative. Her leg was still weak, still learning to trust itself again. But with each step, she grew steadier, more confident. By the time she reached the swings, she was almost running. Maylin pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Around her, neighbors clapped and cheered. Mrs. Henderson, the same woman who had turned off her hose and gone inside while Kayla screamed, was crying too. Mr. Pruitt, who had closed his blinds, stood at the edge of the crowd with his head bowed. Shame has a way of finding people eventually. But today wasn't about shame. Today was about healing, about second chances, about a little girl who had been broken and was now whole again. Kayla climbed onto a swing and pumped her legs, soaring higher and higher, laughing, really laughing for the first time since that terrible day. And then she stopped. She was looking at something in the distance. Someone. Maylin followed her gaze. At the end of a side street, barely visible behind a row of parked cars, a single black motorcycle idled in the shadows. Julian Hahn sat astride it, watching. His men were parked further back, 3 bikes, 3 silent guardians, but Julian was alone at the front. Kayla raised her small hand and waved. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Julian raised his hand in return. Maylin's chest tightened. She said something to a neighbor, handed off her purse, and walked across the park, past the swings and slides, until she reached the side street where Julian waited. He didn't remove his sunglasses. "You didn't have to do any of this," Maylin said quietly. "The playground, the protection, any of it." Julian was silent for a moment. Then he reached up and took off his sunglasses, meeting her eyes. "Yes, I did." He looked past her, toward the playground, toward the little girl pumping her legs on the swing, laughing in the sunlight. "Take care of her, Mrs. Park." His voice was rough. "She's going to change the world someday." He put his sunglasses back on. Started his engine. The rumble was low and deep, vibrating through the quiet street. His men fell in behind him, 3 bikes pulling out from the shadows, forming a convoy, and Julian Hahn rode away, disappearing around the corner without looking back. The neighborhood watched them go, not with fear this time, with something none of them had ever expected to feel for a man like Julian Hahn. Gratitude, and maybe, just maybe, hope. Hope that even the darkest souls can find their way back to the light. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, sometimes the people we fear the most are the ones fighting the hardest to become something better.